The morning after the Verdian retreat, Kaya woke to the sound of rain pattering against the reinforced windows of her quarters. She had been given a room in the human settlement, something the colony administrator had insisted upon after the confrontation with the alien military force. The space was comfortable enough with basic furniture and a view that overlooked the mining operations below. But comfort was something Kaya had learned not to depend upon in her travels through the galaxy. Zephyr was curled up on the floor beside her sleeping platform, his massive body taking up nearly half the room. The dragon's scales glinted softly in the pale morning light. Ember was outside, Kaya knew, probably exploring the boundaries of the colony and marking her territory as dragons were known to do. The two creatures had been her companions for 3 years now, ever since the incident on the planet Valorian where she had first encountered them. She stretched and moved to the window, pressing her palm against the cool glass. Below, workers were already moving about the mining operations. The Verdian threat had not paralyzed the colony. If anything, it had energized them. Humans, Kaya had discovered, often responded to danger with increased determination. They were strange creatures in that way, finding strength in adversity rather than retreating from it. A soft knock came at her door. Kaya did not need to ask who it was. She could sense Daniel's presence, his particular frequency of thought that seemed to broadcast itself like a beacon to her enhanced perception. She called for him to enter, and the young man stepped inside. He was tall by human standards, with dark hair and the kind of earnest face that suggested he took everything very seriously. He had been the colony coordinator for only 6 months before the crisis with the Verdians. Daniel greeted her and asked if she had slept well. Kaya told him she had rested, though sleep was not something she required as much as humans did. Her elf physiology was different. Her need for rest measured in days rather than the nightly cycles humans followed. Daniel nodded as if he understood, though Kaya suspected he did not fully comprehend the biological differences between human and elf. He came to the point quickly. The colony had received a message from the central human government on the core worlds. The message was being broadcast across all human settlements in this sector. It spoke of the confrontation with the Verdians and called it a miracle. It spoke of the elf woman and her dragons as heroes who had saved not just one colony, but had demonstrated that humans were not an easy conquest. The message concluded by saying that all humans should be ready to stand with their alien allies against tyranny. Kaya listened carefully to every word. She understood the implications. The humans were taking what had happened and using it to build morale across their entire sector. They were rewriting the narrative, making the confrontation into something more significant than it had been. This was not necessarily dishonest, but it was definitely calculated. She asked Daniel what he thought about the message. He hesitated, seeming to consider his words carefully before speaking. He said that the message was good for human morale, but he was worried about what it might mean for the settlement. He asked if the Verdians would send a larger force, something the humans could not defend against even with the dragon's help. This was a question Kaya had already considered. She told Daniel that the Verdians would likely send a diplomatic inquiry before attempting any military response. What had happened on their platform had been unexpected and embarrassing for the Verdian command. They would want to understand what they had faced before committing additional resources to a confrontation they did not fully comprehend. Daniel seemed to relax somewhat at this assessment. He told Kaya that the Colony Council had met early that morning and voted unanimously to offer her a permanent position. They wanted her to stay and serve as an ambassador between the colony and the outside forces that might threaten them. They also wanted to learn from her and the dragons to understand how humans could develop relationships with creatures as powerful as dragons. Kaya moved away from the window and looked directly at Daniel. She asked him what the colony could offer her in return for such a commitment. The question seemed to catch him off guard. He stumbled over his words, suggesting credits, housing, and access to colony resources. Kaya smiled slightly. She did not need credits, and housing was already provided. What she needed was something far more fundamental. She told Daniel that she would stay, but on one condition. The colony needed to commit to learning everything they could about the dragons. They needed to understand that these creatures were not weapons or tools, but conscious beings deserving of respect and autonomy. If any human ever tried to control or command the dragons through force or manipulation, she would leave immediately and take the dragons with her. Daniel agreed without hesitation. He said that the colony had already started to understand this through watching how the dragons interacted with Kaya. He said it was clear to anyone with eyes that the dragons had chosen to be with her, not the other way around. Over the following weeks, life in the settlement took on new rhythms. Kaya spent her mornings working with the human administrators, explaining what she knew about the various alien species they might encounter. She told them about the Verdians' hierarchy and their reliance on military power as a measure of civilization. She told them about the merchant species called the Thalorians, who valued trade above all else and could be negotiated with if approached correctly. She told them about the mysterious beings called the architects, who lived in deep space and were rarely encountered by other species. Her afternoons were spent with the dragons. Zephyr and Ember had begun exploring the surrounding landscape, but they always returned to Kaya by the time evening fell. She had started teaching the colony's scientists about dragon behavior and physiology. What she revealed surprised everyone. The dragons were not mindless beasts, but creatures with complex social structures and surprisingly sophisticated forms of communication. One afternoon, a group of colony workers came to observe the dragons while they ate. Zephyr had caught something large in the mining pits, a six-legged creature that the locals called a stone crawler. The dragon tore into his meal with evident satisfaction. Ember watched from a distance, occasionally chirping something that sounded almost like conversation. One of the workers asked Kaya what the dragons were saying to each other. Kaya listened for a moment, tuning into the subtle frequencies that dragons seemed to use. She told the workers that Ember was commenting on the quality of the food and asking Zephyr if he had seen her eggs in the caverns to the north. This revelation caused immediate excitement. Kaya realized she had just disclosed something crucial. The dragons were not just traveling companions. They had established themselves here. They had nesting sites and breeding grounds. They were thinking about the future as a permanent presence in this sector. That evening, Kaya went to find Daniel. She found him in the colony's administrative center, a large building that housed communication equipment and data storage systems. She told him that the dragons were considering this colony as a possible home base, but they would need certain assurances. They would need access to specific territories where they could hunt and establish nesting sites. They would need the colony to protect these territories from human interference. Daniel listened carefully, and then asked if Kaya wanted him to present this to the council. She told him yes, but she also told him something else. She said that if the colony could not provide these things, then she and the dragons would leave and seek another settlement. She said that what had happened with the Verdians was important, but it was not the reason the dragons had come to this place. They had come because they were looking for a home just like she was. Daniel promised to bring the matter before the colony council at their next meeting. He also asked Kaya about her own future. He said it seemed like she had been traveling for a long time and probably had memories of many worlds and many conflicts. He asked if she was looking for a home too. Kaya did not answer immediately. She walked to the window and looked out at the twin moons rising in the evening sky. She thought about the years she had spent moving from world to world, settling nowhere, belonging nowhere. She thought about how the dragons had changed her life by giving her something to protect and care for. She thought about how humans had changed her understanding of what it meant to be part of a community. She told Daniel that yes, she was looking for a home. She said that for a long time she had believed that home was something Elf could not truly find among humans and other species. But watching the colony respond to the Verdian threat, seeing how different beings could work together toward a common goal, had begun to change her mind. Maybe home was not a place but a purpose. Maybe home was where you could make a difference. The next morning brought unexpected news. A ship had arrived in the colony's orbit. It was not a Verdian vessel and not a merchant ship either. The communications officer who brought Kaya the information seemed uncertain about what they were facing. The ship's transponder identified it as being from the Neutral Alliance, an organization that Kaya knew well. They were investigators and peace brokers who traveled between sectors, mediating disputes and investigating inside. The Neutral Alliance investigator was a being that Kaya had not encountered before. She was roughly humanoid, but with skin that seemed to shift colors depending on the light and temperature around her. Her name was given as Prisia, and she carried herself with the kind of confidence that suggested she had investigated conflicts far more complicated than a simple confrontation between a colony and an attempted military conquest. Prisia set up her investigation in the colony's largest meeting hall. She requested that Kaya Daniel and the 3 Verdian officers who had been captured provide statements about what had transpired. The Verdian officers had been held in detention since the confrontation, kept comfortable but confined. They seemed almost relieved to finally have an opportunity to speak about their experience. The commander, whose name was Skirvax, went first. He explained to Prisia that the Verdian forces had arrived with orders to assess the human colony and incorporate it into Verdian administration. He said that there had been no intention of harm, merely the standard procedure for bringing new worlds under Verdian governance. He described the elf woman and her dragons as an unexpected complication. He explained that the dragons had used what he called a sonic weapon to disable their equipment and force their retreat. When Prisia asked him if he considered the response proportional to his demands, Skirvax hesitated. He said that from a Verdian perspective, the dragons had used military force against a legitimate authority. From the neutral alliance perspective, Kaya understood. It was an act of self-defense against an invasion force. The distinction mattered enormously. Kaya was called to provide her statement next. She stood before Prisia and explained calmly what had happened. She told the investigator about the Verdian commander's jokes and dismissive attitude toward the elf and the dragons. She explained that she had warned them about the human alliance with the dragons and that this warning had been ignored. She described how Zephyr and Ember had responded when she gave them permission to defend the colony. Prisia listened without interruption, her skin shifting to a pale blue color that Kaya had begun to interpret as a sign of concentration. When Kaya finished, Prisia asked a crucial question. She asked if the dragons had been under Kaya's direct control when they produced the sonic effect. Kaya answered honestly. She said that the dragons were not under her control but rather acting in partnership with her. She said that she had not commanded them to attack, but had instead communicated to them that the Verdians represented a threat to the colony. The dragons had then chosen their own response based on their understanding of the situation. This seemed to interest Prisia greatly. She asked Kaya to explain the nature of the relationship between the elf and the dragons. Kaya described it as a bond that transcended normal animal relationships. She said the dragons were sentient beings capable of making independent decisions. She said that they had chosen to associate with her and with the human colony because they believed in protecting those who could not protect themselves. Over the next several days, Prisia conducted extensive interviews with colony residents. She examined the damage to the Verdian shuttle and spoke with the engineers who had assessed it. She interviewed the humans who had witnessed the confrontation from the shelter areas. She spent time observing Zephyr and Ember, watching how they interacted with Kaya and with each other. On the 4th day of the investigation, Prisia called a final meeting. She told the assembled group that she had reached her conclusions. The Neutral Alliance would be filing a report with the Central Governing Authority. In the report, she would state that the human colony at this location had acted in self-defense against a military force that had attempted an illegal occupation. She would note that the dragons appeared to be independent agents capable of their own decision-making and were not weapons or tools of the elf woman. She told Skirvax that the Verdian collective would be formally censured for attempting to occupy a colonial territory without proper authorization from the Neutral Alliance. She said that the incident would be recorded in the permanent archives, and any future Verdian attempts to claim territory in this sector would be viewed with suspicion. Prisia then turned to Kaya. She said something that caught everyone by surprise. She said that the Neutral Alliance was interested in formally recognizing the dragons as an independent species with territorial claims and self-determination rights. She asked if Kaya would be willing to serve as an official ambassador for the dragons until they could develop their own diplomatic corps. Kaya considered this carefully. It was a significant responsibility, one that would bind her more closely to both the colony and to the larger galactic community. But it was also something that would give the dragons legal protection and recognition that they had never possessed before. She agreed to the position. Prisia smiled, her skin turning a warm green color that Kaya interpreted as satisfaction. The investigator said that she would arrange for official documentation to be prepared. She also said that she would recommend to the Neutral Alliance that they establish a formal liaison office in the colony to help coordinate with the dragons and the human settlement. After Prisia concluded her investigation, she prepared to depart. Before leaving, She asked Kaya to meet with her privately in her ship. Kaya climbed aboard the vessel and was led to a comfortable cabin that overlooked the colony below. Prisia offered her something to drink, a beverage that tasted faintly of minerals and had a pleasant cooling effect. Prisia told Kaya that there was something she wanted to discuss that was not part of the official investigation. She said that in her long career with the Neutral Alliance, she had encountered many species and many individuals who claimed to represent those species, but she had rarely met anyone who seemed to genuinely understand the nature of relationships between different forms of consciousness. She asked Kaya about her history. She asked how an elf had come to be traveling through space and how she had met the dragons. Kaya told her story, beginning with her exile from the elf colonies for refusing to participate in their isolationist policies. She described how she had left seeking to understand other worlds and other cultures. She described the moment she had found the dragons imprisoned on Valorian, held by a brutal mining corporation that considered them nothing more than resources to be exploited. Kaya explained that she had freed the dragons, and that they had, in turn, freed her from a kind of loneliness she had not realized she was experiencing. She said that the dragons had taught her that consciousness could take many forms, and that honor and courage were not unique to any single species. Prisia listened intently. She told Kaya that what she was describing was rare and valuable. She said that most of the conflicts in the galaxy arose from one species refusing to acknowledge the consciousness and autonomy of another species. She said that the work Kaya was doing, by serving as a bridge between different forms of intelligence, was some of the most important work that could be done. Before departing, Prisia gave Kaya something. It was a small device, a communication tool that would allow direct contact with the Neutral Alliance at any time. She told Kaya that if the colony or the dragons ever faced threats or needed assistance, they should use this to contact the Alliance. She said that she would personally see to any calls that came through this device. After Prisia left and her ship disappeared into the atmosphere, Kaya felt a strange sense of transition. Something had changed in the larger arc of her story. What had begun as a simple act of defense had become something far more significant. She and the dragons were now officially recognized as important players in the larger galactic community. They were no longer just travelers or refugees. They were ambassadors. That evening, Daniel found her standing on the platform again, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. He asked her if she was overwhelmed by what had happened. Kaya told him that she was processing the changes, but she was not overwhelmed. She said that over the years she had learned to accept transitions as they came rather than resist them. Daniel said something that made her pause. He told her that the colony was grateful beyond measure, but he was also worried about her burden. He said that by being an ambassador for the dragons, she was taking responsibility for their future and their safety. He asked if that was too much weight for one elf to carry. Kaya considered this. She told Daniel that it was not too much because she was not carrying it alone. She had the dragons, who were intelligent and capable. She had the colony, who had committed themselves to understanding and protecting the dragons. And she had the Neutral Alliance, which had resources and authority to help defend against those who might try to harm them. She said something else that seemed important. She told Daniel that the real change that had happened was not in her situation, but in how the universe was beginning to recognize that different species could work together. She said that what had started as a joke by a Verdian commander had opened up possibilities that had not existed before. Daniel asked her what she thought would happen next. Kaya looked at him and smiled. She said that she did not know exactly, but she was fairly certain that their quiet mining colony was about to become far more interesting. 3 months passed since Prisia's investigation had concluded. The colony had changed in subtle but significant ways. New structures had been built to accommodate the growing diplomatic presence. Scientists from various institutions across human space had arrived to study the dragons under Kaya's supervision. News of the elf and her dragons had spread far enough that merchants and adventurers began making stops at the colony, curious to see the creatures that had defeated a Verdian military force. Kaya found herself busier than she had ever been. She spent her mornings conducting formal interviews with researchers who wanted to understand dragon physiology and behavior. She spent her afternoons mediating between the dragons and the human workers, who were beginning construction on expanded territory that the dragons would eventually inhabit. She spent her evenings learning the diplomatic protocols that would be expected of her as an official ambassador. Daniel had grown into his role as colony coordinator with surprising competence. He managed the flow of visitors and ensured that the delicate balance between scientific interest and dragon privacy was maintained. He had also become something more important to Kaya over these months, though she had not yet found the right words to express what that was. He was a friend, certainly. But he was also becoming someone she consulted with on important decisions, someone whose opinion she valued in ways that went beyond the practical. One afternoon, a ship arrived that was neither a merchant vessel nor a research expedition. It was a sleek and efficient design that Kaya recognized immediately as belonging to the Thalorian Merchant Collective. The Thalorians were a species that humans rarely encountered directly, preferring to conduct business through intermediaries and digital communication systems. Their physical form was somewhat uncomfortable for most carbon-based life forms to observe, and they seemed to have adapted their entire civilization to minimize direct interaction. However, the message that came from the arriving Thalorian ship was direct and specific. They had a proposal for the Dragon Riders. They wanted to discuss exclusive trade agreements for dragon-produced goods. They had learned that dragons shed their scales periodically, and these scales had remarkable properties that could be incorporated into advanced technologies. Kaya met with Daniel immediately to discuss this development. She expressed concern about the Thalorian interest. She told Daniel that while the Thalorians were not overtly hostile as a species, they had a tendency to view everything through the lens of economic utility. She said that allowing them access to dragon scales would be dangerous, because it might lead to pressure to maximize scale production, which could harm the dragons. Daniel listened carefully and then offered a suggestion. He said that before refusing the Thalorians, they should at least hear what they had to offer. He said that the colony could benefit from trade agreements, and the dragons might not object to a small amount of scale trading if it was done ethically, and the dragons were compensated fairly. Kaya agreed to meet with the Thalorian representative. The being that emerged from the ship was smaller than Kaya had expected, barely 4 feet in height, with a body structure that seemed to shift and adjust itself constantly. The Thalorian introduced itself as Merchant Class Designate 17, though it suggested that Kaya could call it by the simplified name of 17 if that was easier for her to process. 17 presented a proposal that was surprisingly reasonable. The Thalorians did not want to force or pressure the dragons into producing scales. Instead, they wanted to purchase the scales that the dragons naturally shed during their growth cycles. They were offering significant payment for these scales, payment that could be used to improve the colony's infrastructure and provide the dragons with whatever resources they needed. Kaya asked, 17. If the Thalorians understood that the dragons were not servants or livestock to be managed for maximum productivity, 17 responded in a way that surprised her. The Thalorian said that yes, they understood this completely. 17 explained that the Thalorian collective had spent centuries learning that long-term profitable relationships required treating partners with respect. 17 said that many species made the mistake of trying to exploit their trading partners, which usually resulted in those partners ending the relationship or seeking alternate arrangements. Kaya found this response refreshing. She told 17 that she would discuss the proposal with the dragons and provide an answer within 3 days. 17 seemed satisfied with this response and retreated back to the ship to wait. That evening, Kaya took the proposal to Zephyr and Ember. She explained what the Thalorians wanted in language that the dragons could easily understand. She told them that they could refuse the trade agreement entirely if they wished. She told them that she would support whatever decision they made. Zephyr and Ember consulted with each other in their strange musical language. After several minutes of this communication, they turned back to Kaya and indicated their willingness to accept the proposal. Zephyr seemed to understand that the Thalorians wanted something that he naturally produced, and that accepting payment for it was reasonable. Ember seemed interested in what the payment could provide, specifically new breeding grounds in the expanded territory. 3 days later, Kaya met with 17 again, and informed him that the dragons had agreed to the trade arrangement. She established clear terms. The dragons would provide only those scales that they naturally shed. The Thalorians would provide payment in the form of specialized equipment and supplies that the colony needed. And most importantly, the arrangement could be terminated by either party at any time if the terms were violated or if the arrangement became harmful to either party. 17 agreed to all terms and activated a communication system to contact the larger Thalorian collective. Over the following week, equipment began arriving. Advanced water filtration systems were installed in the colony. Specialized medical equipment that could treat elf and dragon physiology was delivered, and most impressively, a shipment of high-end construction materials arrived, allowing the colony to begin building the expanded dragon territories with much greater speed and efficiency. The trade agreement with the Thalorians marked a turning point in the colony's development. What had begun as a simple human mining settlement was beginning to transform into something far more complex and cosmopolitan. Visitors came from increasingly distant parts of galactic space. Some came out of scientific curiosity. Others came seeking trade opportunities. Still others came because they had heard rumors about an elf and her dragons and wanted to witness the phenomenon themselves. Not all of these visitors were welcomed by Kaya, but she learned to handle them with diplomatic skill. She discovered that there was an art to polite refusal and strategic omission of information. She learned how to talk about the dragons in ways that emphasized their independence and intelligence without revealing specific details about their capabilities or vulnerabilities. One evening, a visitor arrived who changed the trajectory of events once again. She was a human woman named Catherine, and she had traveled alone from the core world specifically to meet Kaya and the dragons. Catherine claimed to be a researcher studying human relationships with non-human species across multiple planets and multiple centuries. She had heard about Kaya and the dragons and believed that their story was important to understanding larger patterns in how different species learn to coexist. Kaya was cautious with Catherine at first. She had learned not to trust strangers who came with grand claims about understanding patterns and larger meanings. But Catherine proved to be different from the other researchers. She asked permission before entering dragon territory. She listened more than she spoke. She seemed genuinely interested in what Kaya thought, rather than just in collecting data for her research. After several days of conversation, Catherine asked Kaya a question that made her consider things she had not really thought about before. Catherine asked if Kaya had ever considered what would happen to the dragons after she was gone. She pointed out that elf lifespan was significantly longer than human lifespan, but it was not infinite. She asked if Kaya was thinking about how to ensure that the dragons would be cared for, and understood after she had passed into whatever version of the afterlife elf experienced. Kaya did not answer immediately. The question was profound and somewhat uncomfortable. She told Catherine that she had not really considered that possibility in detail. She said that she had been focused on the present and on building solid foundations for the dragons and the colony in the time she had available. Catherine told her that this was understandable but perhaps not wise. Catherine suggested that Kaya should consider training others to understand dragons and to serve as advocates for them. Catherine said that Daniel seemed like a logical choice for such training. Catherine also suggested that the dragons themselves might benefit from teaching younger dragons about their relationship with humans and elf, creating a kind of institutional memory that would persist even after Kaya was gone. The colony had grown substantially over the past year. New habitation structures had been built to accommodate the growing human population, and expanded territories had been prepared for the dragons. A formal diplomatic compound had been established where ambassadors from various species could meet and conduct negotiations. The mining operations had doubled in efficiency, because the dragons had proven willing to help move and process certain materials that were difficult for humans to handle. But with this growth came complications that Kaya had not fully anticipated. There were now competing interests within the colony regarding how resources should be allocated. Some wanted more funding for scientific research. Others wanted more investment in infrastructure. Still others pushed for expanded mining operations that would increase profits but also place greater pressure on the dragons and their territory. Kaya found herself spending more time mediating conflicts than she did anything else. She was beginning to understand that success brought its own burdens. As the colony became more important and more influential, everyone wanted access to her and to the dragons. Everyone wanted her endorsement for their particular project or initiative. One morning, she woke to find Daniel already gone from their shared quarters. This was unusual. She and Daniel had settled into a comfortable routine where they started each day together, before their responsibilities pulled them in different directions. She found him in the administrative center, looking stressed and overwhelmed. Daniel explained that during the night he had received an urgent communication from the central human government. The message indicated that there was political pressure to expand mining operations significantly. Some powerful government officials had learned about the colony's success with dragon cooperation and wanted to replicate it on a much larger scale. They were proposing to send additional equipment and personnel to establish mining operations across 3 neighboring territories, and they were expecting Kaya and the dragons to facilitate this expansion. Kaya felt her stomach tighten. She understood immediately what this meant. The expansion would require that the dragons either leave their current territory or accept that their territory would be reduced to make room for mining infrastructure. It would mean that the relationship between dragons and humans would shift from genuine partnership to something more like exploitation. She told Daniel to schedule an emergency meeting with the colony council. She told him that she needed to think carefully about how to respond to this development, and she told him that whatever happened next would be significant. She had a feeling that the time of relative peace was about to end. The council meeting that evening was tense. Kaya presented the situation to everyone and asked for their input. The response was mixed. Some council members were excited about the prospect of expansion and greater profits. Others were concerned about what expansion would mean for the dragons and for the carefully balanced relationships that had been built. One council member, an engineer named Marcus, expressed a concern that Kaya appreciated. He said that if the colony betrayed the dragons for profit, they would be confirming every prejudice that other species held about humans. He said that the Verdians and other aggressive species thought that all species would prioritize resources over honor. He said that the colony had an opportunity to prove those prejudices wrong. Another council member, a woman named Patricia, disagreed. She argued that the colony had a responsibility to its own people to pursue economic growth and better living conditions. She said that reasonable compromise could be reached where mining operations and dragon territory could coexist. She suggested that the dragons could simply move to different territories if the current ones became too crowded. Kaya listened to both perspectives and then spoke. She told the council that she appreciated their honesty in expressing these different viewpoints. She said that she understood the appeal of economic expansion, but she also said that she had made a commitment to the dragons that she would not let them be exploited or marginalized for human benefit. She said that she would not support expansion plans that violated this commitment, regardless of the pressure from the central government. She then made an announcement that surprised everyone. She said that if the central government insisted on expansion, despite her opposition, she and the dragons would leave the colony. She said that she would take her official ambassador status and the diplomatic relationships she had cultivated to another sector, where her commitment to dragon protection would be respected. She said that losing the dragons and losing the diplomatic relationships they had built would cost the colony far more than any short-term profit from expanded mining. The council chamber went silent. Patricia spoke again, her tone less confrontational. She asked if there was any way to compromise. She asked if there was a way to conduct the expansion in a way that the dragons would accept. Kaya considered this. She told the council that yes, there might be a way. She said that she would need to discuss with the dragons what kind of arrangement might be acceptable. She said that if the dragons agreed to limited expansion in specific territories, and if humans agreed to invest resources in creating dragon sanctuaries that were completely off-limits to mining operations, then maybe a compromise could be reached. She also told the council that she would need to communicate with the central government about realistic expectations. She said that she would make clear that any expansion would have to be approved by her and by the dragons, and that any expansion that violated dragon sanctuaries or harmed dragon populations would result in her resignation as ambassador and her departure from the colony. Over the next few weeks, Kaya engaged in complex negotiations on multiple fronts. She communicated with the dragons about what they would and would not accept. She worked with the colony council to identify specific territories that could be expanded without harming key dragon habitats. She composed official communications to the central government, explaining the constraints and limitations that had to be respected. The response from the central government was frustrating. The officials wanted full expansion without restrictions. They suggested that Kaya was being unreasonable and that she was allowing her personal attachment to the dragons to cloud her judgment about what was good for humanity. Some officials even suggested that the colony council should overrule her objections and proceed with expansion plans. Kaya knew that she had reached a critical moment. She knew that if the council chose to support the central government over her, she would have to follow through on her threat to leave. The question was whether the council would value her judgment and the long-term stability of their relationship with the dragons, or whether they would prioritize short-term profit and government approval. Daniel stood beside her through this process. He worked with other council members to build support for Kaya's position. He made the argument that the colony's greatest asset was not its mining resources but its relationship with the dragons and its reputation as a place where different species could coexist peacefully. He argued that betraying the dragons would destroy this asset and harm the colony far more than any profit expansion could benefit it. In the end, the council voted 5-3 in support of Kaya's position. The 3 dissenting votes were disappointing, but the majority support was what mattered. The council authorized Kaya to communicate to the central government that the colony would support only a limited expansion that was approved by both the colony council and by Kaya acting as the dragon's representative. The central government was not pleased with this response. Threats were made. The government suggested that the colony might lose funding or face other sanctions if they did not comply with expansion orders. But the council stood firm, and eventually the central government backed down. They could not afford to lose the colony and its diplomatic relationships with the dragons. Too many powerful interests now depended on the successful cooperation between humans and dragons. When the tension finally began to ease, Kaya realized something important. She realized that the colony, and particularly the council and Daniel, had chosen to support her and the dragons. They had chosen honor over profit. They had chosen to prove that humans could be different from the stereotypes that other species held about them. That evening, she took Daniel to the platform where she had stood so many times over the past year. The twin moons were rising together, a rare alignment that only happened a few times a year. The light they cast was soft and blue, transforming the landscape into something almost magical. Kaya told Daniel that she was proud of him. She told him that what he had done, how he had advocated for the dragons and for the colony's long-term interests, showed the kind of character that made genuine partnership between species possible. She told him that she had been thinking about the future, about what Catherine had suggested regarding legacy and training others. She asked Daniel if he would be willing to work with her to create a formal training program for humans who wanted to understand dragons and serve as advocates for them. She said that this program could eventually ensure that even after she was gone, there would be humans who understood the dragons and could represent their interests. 2 years had passed since the threat of forced expansion had been overcome. The colony had grown in ways that were positive and sustainable. The training program for dragon advocates had expanded to include not just humans, but also members of other species who wanted to learn about cross-species partnership. The mining operations had continued at a steady level that provided good profit without harming dragon territory or endangering dragon populations. Kaya stood in the new dragon sanctuary, facility that had been built as part of the compromise between expansion and conservation. The facility was designed not to imprison or control the dragons, but to provide them with access to specialized food sources and medical equipment that could treat injuries or illnesses. Ember had just given birth to 3 eggs, and the facility had been essential in helping her through the hatching process. Kaya watched as Ember carefully arranged the eggs in a heated nesting chamber. The dragon was attentive and protective, occasionally chirping warnings when any human or other being came too close. Zephyr was in an adjacent chamber, having chosen to remain nearby despite not being the biological father. The dragons seemed to understand partnership and family in ways that transcended traditional biological relationships. Daniel entered the observation room where Kaya was standing. He had grown into his role as colony coordinator with remarkable skill and compassion. He was now working closely with Kaya to document everything they learned about dragons, creating an archive that would preserve this knowledge for future generations. He was also preparing to transition some of his administrative duties to younger members of the colony so that he could dedicate more time to dragon studies. Daniel told Kaya that the Neutral Alliance had sent a new communication. The message came from Precia, who had been promoted to a higher position within the Alliance structure. Prisia was requesting that Kaya and Daniel visit the Central Alliance headquarters to present their work on interspecies cooperation. Prisia believed that the story and research from the colony could have significant influence on how the Alliance approached future conflicts between different species. Kaya considered this request. Travel to the Alliance headquarters would mean leaving the colony and the dragons for an extended period. But she also understood that this was an opportunity to spread the principles they had been developing. She told Daniel that she wanted to accept the invitation, but only if the Colony Council agreed and only if the training program could continue effectively in their absence. The Colony Council met that afternoon and voted unanimously to support Kaya and Daniel's departure for the Alliance headquarters. Council members also voted to appoint a delegation from the training program to serve as temporary representatives for the dragons while Kaya and Daniel were away. The delegation included several of the most experienced and committed students from the program. Before departing, Kaya spent time with both Zephyr and Ember. She communicated to them where she was going and why. She explained that she would be representing them and their interests at the Alliance headquarters. She told them that she would be gone for approximately 3 months but would return. The dragons seemed to understand, though Kaya could sense their concern about her departure. She also spent private time with Daniel. She told him that what they were about to do was important, but also risky. She said that by going to the Alliance headquarters and making their case for interspecies cooperation, they would be putting themselves in a position where their ideas could be challenged or rejected. She said that this was necessary risk to take if they wanted to create real change. Daniel took her hand and told her that he was not afraid of the risk. He said that what they had built here was real and solid enough to withstand scrutiny. He said that the principles they had developed were based on genuine understanding and respect for other species. He said that these principles would be persuasive to anyone with an open mind. The journey to the Alliance headquarters took 2 weeks by commercial transport. Kaya and Daniel spent the time preparing their presentation. They organized data, created visual displays that showed the economic and social benefits of their interspecies cooperation model, and practiced explaining complex concepts in simple language that would be accessible to beings from many different species. The Alliance headquarters was located on a neutral world that had been designated specifically for diplomatic purposes. The planet was carefully climate-controlled to accommodate visitors from many different species. The architecture was designed to be comfortable for beings of different shapes, sizes, and environmental needs. Everything about the facility suggested a commitment to genuine inclusion and understanding. Prisia greeted them personally when they arrived. The Neutral Alliance investigator's skin shifted to a warm golden color that Kaya had come to interpret as genuine pleasure. Prisia told them that there had been significant interest in their presentation and that the attendance was expected to be very large. The presentation took place in an enormous auditorium that was filled with representatives from dozens of different species. Some Kaya recognized, like the Verdians and Thalorians. Others were completely unfamiliar. There were beings with exoskeletons and beings with what appeared to be pure energy forms. There were very large creatures and very small ones. All of them had come to listen to the story of an elf, her dragons, and a human colony learning to work together. Kaya stood at the center of the auditorium and began to speak. She told the story of how she had found the dragons imprisoned on Valorian. She told the story of the confrontation with the Verdian forces. She told the story of how the colony had learned to respect and partner with the dragons. She told the story of the crisis when expansion threatened to destroy the relationships they had built and how the colony chose to stand by its principles. As she spoke, she noticed the effect her words were having on the audience. Representatives from species known for aggressive expansion were leaning forward, listening intently. Scientists were taking notes. Diplomats were conferring with each other. By the end of her presentation, there was a moment of profound silence before the auditorium erupted in a form of sound that the translation system indicated was enthusiastic approval. Daniel then presented the data and research that demonstrated the practical benefits of their approach. He showed how mining productivity had actually increased because the dragons were willing to help move certain materials. He showed how trade relationships had expanded dramatically because the colony's reputation for ethical treatment of all beings had become known throughout space. He showed how human-dragon cooperation had led to innovations that neither species would have developed alone. The question and answer period that followed lasted for hours. Beings from many different species asked about specific aspects of the colony's model. They asked about how conflicts were resolved. They asked about how trust was built across species barriers. They asked about what would happen if one of the partners violated the agreement. Kaya answered each question honestly. She explained that trust was built through consistent action over time. She explained that conflicts were resolved through genuine listening and through willingness to compromise. She explained that violations of agreements were met with clear consequences, but consequences were always applied fairly and with the goal of restoring the relationship rather than destroying it. After the formal presentation concluded, individual species representatives requested private meetings with Kaya and Daniel. Some wanted to learn how to replicate the model in their own territories. Others wanted to discuss potential trade opportunities with the colony. Still others simply wanted to understand more about what had motivated Kaya to commit her life to this work. One meeting was particularly significant. A delegation from the Verdian Collective came to speak with Kaya. They said that they had watched her presentation with great interest. They explained that the Verdian military had been re-evaluating their approach to space exploration and colonization. They said that the incident at the human colony had forced them to acknowledge that not all resistance to Verdian authority came from primitive beings trying to maintain backward ways. They said that some resistance came from genuine partners in territory who had aligned against Verdian authority. The Verdian delegation expressed regret for the attempted conquest of the colony. They explained that this regret had led to policy changes within the Verdian military. They asked if there was any way to establish a peaceful relationship between the Verdians and the human colony. Kaya considered this carefully before responding. She told the Verdians that she would be willing to help facilitate such a relationship, but it would require genuine commitment to respecting both human and dragon autonomy. She said that she would bring the proposal to the Colony Council, and that if the Council and the dragons agreed, negotiations could begin. When Kaya and Daniel returned to the colony after 3 months, they found that significant changes had occurred during their absence. The training program had expanded dramatically, with students from 20 different species now participating. The dragons had proven themselves to be skilled teachers, and the eggs that Ember had laid had successfully hatched into 3 young dragons that were already showing intelligence and